Jack Torres wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag and stared at the blinking red light on his console. Another distress beacon in the middle of nowhere, which usually meant another fool who ran out of fuel or got their navigation system fried by cosmic radiation. He'd been working the Outer Rim asteroid belt for 15 years now, pulling scrap metal and salvageable tech from dead ships and forgotten mining stations. It was lonely work, but it paid well enough to keep his modified salvage vessel running and his belly full. The beacon was strange, though. It was not broadcasting on any of the standard emergency frequencies that most ships used. Instead, it was sending out a deep, pulsing signal that made his equipment hum in ways he had never heard before. Jack checked his star charts and found nothing listed in that sector. No trade routes, no mining claims, no research stations. Just empty space between two dead systems that nobody bothered to visit anymore. He thought about ignoring it. The smart thing would be to log the coordinates and report it to the authorities when he next docked at Port Haven. Let someone else deal with whatever mess was waiting out there. But Jack had never been accused of being smart, and curiosity had always been his weakness. Besides, an unregistered distress beacon might mean an unregistered ship, and unregistered ships often carried the kind of cargo that made salvage runs profitable. Jack fired up his engines and set course for the beacon. His ship, which he had named the Rust Bucket, though the official registry called it the Endurance, was not much to look at. It was a patchwork of hull plates from a dozen different vessels, held together with welding seams and determination. The cockpit smelled like motor oil and recycled air, and the artificial gravity generator made a grinding noise that would have worried a sane person, but was home and had never let him down when things got rough. The journey took 3 hours through normal space. Jack used the time to check his equipment and run diagnostics on his cutting tools. If this was a salvage job, he wanted to be ready. His plasma cutter was fully charged, his magnetic clamps were working, and his portable life support unit had fresh oxygen canisters. He even cleaned his sidearm, though he hoped he would not need it. Pirates were rare this far out, but you never knew what kind of people might be drifting in a damaged ship. When the target finally appeared on his sensors, Jack nearly choked on his coffee. The ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of anything he had ever salvaged. But size was not what made him stare. The design was completely wrong. Human ships were built like flying boxes, all straight lines and practical angles. Even alien vessels followed similar patterns, with maybe some curves here and there for atmospheric entry. This thing looked like it had been grown instead of built, the hull curved and twisted in organic spirals, as if some giant sea creature had been flash frozen in space. Strange crystalline structures jutted out from the surface, catching and reflecting the distant starlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. Some sections seemed to pulse with a faint inner glow, while others were completely dark. Jack had seen a lot of weird things in his years as a salvager, but nothing like this. He brought the Rust Bucket alongside the strange vessel and activated his scanning equipment. The readings made no sense. Parts of the ship registered as metal, but other sections showed up as something his computer could not identify. The hull appeared to be intact, with no obvious signs of battle damage or collision. Whatever had disabled this ship, it was not immediately visible from the outside. Jack suited up in his work gear and grabbed his equipment bag. The magnetic clamps on his boots locked onto the alien hull with reassuring clicks as he made his way toward what looked like an airlock. Up close, the ship's surface felt warm even through his insulated gloves. The crystalline structures hummed with barely audible vibrations that he could feel in his bones. Finding the airlock was harder than expected. The organic curves of the hull made it difficult to distinguish functional features from decorative ones. When he finally located what appeared to be an entry point, it took him 20 minutes to figure out how to open it. The mechanism was completely unlike anything in his experience, responding to touch and pressure in ways that seemed almost alive. The airlock cycled through procedures that his suit's computer could not interpret, but eventually the inner door opened with a sound like a deep breath being released. Jack stepped inside and immediately knew he was in trouble. His helmet's heads-up display was going crazy, showing readings that made no sense. The atmosphere was breathable for humans, which should have been impossible. The temperature was exactly 22 degrees, which was a standard setting for human life support systems. Either this was the most unlikely coincidence in galactic history, or something very strange was going on. The corridor beyond the airlock stretched into darkness that his helmet lights could barely penetrate. The walls were the same organic curves as the exterior, but now they pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns that reminded him of deep-sea creatures from old Earth documentaries. His footsteps echoed strangely, as if the ship was much larger inside than appeared from outside. Jack followed the corridor deeper into the vessel, using his scanner to map the layout as he went. The ship seemed to be built around a central chamber, with smaller rooms and passages branching off like the chambers of a heart. Everything was sized for beings much larger than humans. The doorways were tall enough for him to walk through without ducking, but they were also wide enough to drive a small vehicle through. As he got closer to what his scanner indicated was a central chamber, Jack began to hear sounds. At first he thought it was just the ship's systems, but gradually he realized he was hearing something alive. Low, rumbling noises that might have been breathing, punctuated by occasional whimpers that sounded almost like crying. His hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, but he forced himself to keep it holstered. Whatever was making those sounds was in distress, not preparing to attack. The entrance to the central chamber was marked by an archway covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when he was not looking directly at them. Jack hesitated for a moment, then stepped through into a space that took his breath away. The chamber was enormous, easily large enough to hold his entire ship. The ceiling curved high overhead, covering the same bioluminescent patterns that provided a soft, pearl-like glow. But what dominated the space was not the architecture. It was the creature chained in the center of the room. The being was unlike anything Jack had ever seen or imagined. It was easily 20 feet from nose to tail, with a body that combined the sleek power of a great cat with the majesty of the dragons from old Earth legends. Its scales shimmered with colors that had no names, shifting from deep emerald to midnight blue to silver, depending on how the light hit them. For powerful legs ended in claws that could have torn through starship plating, and wings that were folded against its sides suggested it was built for flight despite its size. But it was the creature's eyes that stopped Jack in his tracks. They were large and intelligent, filled with an ancient sadness that spoke of loss beyond measure. When those eyes focused on him, Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This was no simple animal. This was a being with thoughts and feelings and a mind that might be older than human civilization. The creature was held by chains that pulsed with malevolent red energy, wrapped around its neck, legs, and wings in a pattern that was clearly designed to cause maximum discomfort. The chains were not just restraints, Jack realized. They were torture devices, slowly draining the life from their victim. Beside the larger creature lay a much smaller version, barely the size of a large dog. Its scales were duller, and its breathing was shallow and labored. A hatchling, Jack thought, probably the offspring of the chained adult. Both creatures were clearly starving and near death. When the adult creature saw Jack, it made a sound that was part growl and part whimper. Despite the language barrier, the meaning was clear. It was begging, pleading for help, not for itself but for the small one beside it. Jack had seen that same desperate look in the eyes of human parents when their children were in danger. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty. The creature watched him with wary hope, its great head following his every movement. Jack knelt beside the smaller creature and gently touched its flank. The scales were warm, but the breathing was definitely labored. Whatever these beings were, they were dying. Jack stood and examined the energy chains more closely. They were connected to conduits that ran to the floor and walls, apparently drawing power from the ship's main systems. The technology was completely alien, but Jack had been working with power systems and energy conduits for most of his adult life. The principles might be different, but energy was energy. He looked back at the adult creature, meeting those ancient, intelligent eyes. "I do not know what you are," he said aloud, knowing the creature probably could not understand him, but needing to say it anyway. "But nobody deserves to be chained up like this." The creature made another sound, softer this time. If Jack did not know better, he would have sworn it sounded like gratitude. Jack opened his equipment bag and pulled out his plasma cutter. It was time to get to work. Jack spent the first hour just studying the chains and trying to understand how they worked. The energy conduits that powered them ran to the walls in patterns that followed no engineering logic he recognized. The red glow pulsed in rhythm with what he eventually realized was the larger creature's heartbeat, growing brighter when the being showed signs of distress and dimming when it tried to rest. The plasma cutter in his hands felt inadequate for the task. These were not simple metal restraints that he could slice through with brute force. The energy field around each chain link shimmered with protective barriers that would probably absorb his cutting beam and redirect it back at him. He needed to understand the system before he could break it. Jack pulled out his scanner and began mapping the energy flow throughout the ship. The readings were confusing at first, showing power levels that fluctuated wildly and followed pathways that seemed to change even as he watched. But gradually a pattern emerged. The ship's central power core was failing, running on backup systems that were not designed for long-term operation. The chains were drawing an enormous amount of energy to maintain their hold, which explained why the ship was dying. The adult creature watched him work with eyes that never left his face. Occasionally, it would make soft rumbling sounds that might have been encouragement or might have been warnings. Jack wished he could communicate with it directly, but he was beginning to suspect that might not be as impossible as it seemed. Several times he had felt strange sensations in his mind, like someone was trying to speak to him in a language he almost understood. When Jack moved closer to examine the chains around the creature's neck, something unexpected happened. Images flashed through his mind, clear and vivid as memories. He saw vast cities built from the same organic architecture as this ship, populated by beings like the chained creature but free and proud. He saw space battles where creatures like this one fought alongside ships he did not recognize against vessels that looked disturbingly familiar. He saw capture and imprisonment and the slow death of an entire civilization. Jack staggered backward, his head spinning from the sudden flood of information. The creature was looking at him with something that might have been surprise in its ancient eyes. It had not expected him to receive the images so clearly. "You can talk," Jack said, though he knew it was more complicated than that. "Not with words, but you can show me things." The creature responded with another series of images. This time Jack saw himself through the creature's eyes, a small figure in a bulky suit who would appear like an answer to desperate prayers. He saw the creature's fear that he might be another captor, then growing hope as it realized he was trying to help. Most importantly, he saw the creature's desperate love for the smaller being beside it, and his terror that the hatchling would die before rescue could come. Jack knelt beside the smaller creature again. Up close, he could see that its breathing was getting worse. Whatever the chains were doing to drain the adult's life force, it was affecting the young one as well. He did not have time for a careful analysis of the alien technology. He had to act now or watch both creatures die. The energy conduits feeding the chains were buried in the walls, but they had to emerge somewhere to connect to the restraints themselves. Jack followed the red glow with his eyes, tracing the power flow from the walls to connection points just below each chain link. The connections were protected by the same energy fields as the chains, but they were also smaller and might be more vulnerable to disruption. Jack fired up his plasma cutter and set it to its lowest power setting. Instead of trying to cut through the energy field, he aimed for the wall just beside one of the connection points. The alien material of the ship's hull resisted the cutting beam at first, then began to glow and melt under sustained heat. Sparks flew as he cut deeper, and the red glow of the nearby chain flickered. The adult creature made an urgent sound, and Jack looked up to see its eyes wide with what looked like fear. More images flashed through his mind, showing him what would happen if he damaged the power systems incorrectly. The feedback could kill both creatures instantly or worse, trigger some kind of security system that would lock the chains permanently. Jack stopped cutting and sat back on his heels, thinking hard. He was a mechanic, not an engineer, but he had spent his entire adult life working with power systems and energy conduits. The principles might be alien, but energy always followed certain rules. It had to flow from a source to a destination, and that flow could be interrupted if you knew where to cut. He pulled out a different tool, a magnetic resonance scanner, that he normally used to check for stress fractures in hull plating. When he pointed it at the wall beside the chain connections, it showed him the internal structure of the power conduits. They were not solid like human wiring, but appeared to be channels of flowing energy contained within crystalline tubes. If he could crack the tubes without completely destroying them, the energy flow would be disrupted but not catastrophically redirected. Jack selected a precise cutting tool from his kit, one designed for delicate work on sensitive electronics. He aimed it at a spot where the scanner showed the energy flow was narrowest, just before it branched off to multiple chain connections. The tool made a thin, focused beam that could cut through almost anything if applied with enough patience. The first cut was barely visible, just a hairline crack in the crystalline conduit. The red glow of the chains flickered but held steady. Jack cut a little deeper, and the glow dimmed noticeably. The adult creature made an encouraging sound, and Jack felt a wave of something like gratitude wash over his mind. He continued cutting, working with the careful precision of a surgeon. Each millimeter deeper caused the energy flow to weaken further. The chains were still holding, but their grip was loosening. The smaller creature's breathing seemed to improve slightly as the draining effect weakened. When Jack's cutting tool finally broke through the conduit completely, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The red glow vanished from an entire section of chains, and they fell away from the adult creature's left foreleg with a clatter that echoed through the chamber. The creature immediately stretched the freed limb, working feeling back into muscles that had been constrained for who knew how long. Encouraged by his success, Jack moved to the next conduit. This one was easier to find now that he understood the pattern. The alien ship's designers had been efficient, if nothing else, using the same connection system throughout. Within minutes, he had freed the creature's right foreleg as well. With 2 limbs free, the adult creature was able to help with its own rescue. It carefully moved its body to give Jack better access to the remaining conduits, while being careful not to disturb the smaller creature that lay between its forelegs. Jack could feel the being's growing excitement through their mental connection, mixed with desperate hope that he would be able to free them both completely. The neck chains were the most difficult because they were connected to multiple conduits that formed a complex network around the creature's head and throat. Jack had to cut each connection point individually, while the creature held perfectly still. One wrong move could have been fatal for both of them, but the being trusted him completely, never flinching even when sparks from his cutting tool landed on its scales. When the neck chains finally fell away, the transformation was remarkable. The creature's head came up with a dignity and pride that had been beaten down by its captivity. Its eyes, which had been dull with pain and despair, now blazed with inner fire. For the first time since Jack had entered the chamber, he truly understood what he was looking at. This was not just an animal or even an intelligent being. This was royalty, a creature born to command and lead, reduced to a chained prisoner by forces beyond its control. The wing chains came off next, and the creature stretched its magnificent wings for the first time in what must have been years. They spanned nearly the width of the chamber, covered in scales that shimmered like liquid metal in the bioluminescent glow. Jack had to step back to avoid being knocked over as the creature worked feeling back into the powerful flight muscles. Only then did the adult creature turn its attention to the smaller being beside it. The hatchling was still breathing, but had not moved during the entire rescue process. The larger creature gently nuzzled the small one with its massive head, making soft crooning sounds that needed no translation. This was a parent comforting a sick child. Jack knelt beside the hatchling and examined the chains that held it. They were smaller versions of the adult restraints, but just as cruel in their design. The energy drain had been slowly killing the young creature, and Jack could see that he might already be too late. The hatchling's breathing was shallow, and its small body felt cold to the touch. Working faster now, Jack cut through the conduits powering the small chains. When they fell away, the hatchling stirred slightly and opened eyes that were miniature versions of its parents. The adult creature made an urgent sound, and suddenly Jack's mind was filled with a single word, repeated over and over in a voice that was unmistakably female. Pip. The hatchling's name was Pip. The larger creature pressed her massive head against Jack's shoulder in a gesture of gratitude that transcended species barriers. Through their mental connection, he learned her name as well, Vera. She had been the leader of her people before the capture, and Pip was not just her offspring, but the future of their entire race. As feeling returned to her limbs and wings, Vera began to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the ship's bioluminescence. Her scales shimmered and sparked with energy that made Jack's equipment readings go wild. She was not just a large animal, he realized. She was a living weapon, capable of things that would make human military commanders weep with envy. But instead of using that power to destroy or intimidate, Vera used it to help her child. She breathed a stream of golden light over Pip's small form, and Jack watched in amazement as the hatchling's condition immediately began to improve. Its breathing deepened, its eyes grew brighter, and it struggled to stand on unsteady legs. When Pip looked at Jack, the young creature's eyes were filled with the fearless curiosity of youth. It approached him without hesitation, sniffing at his equipment and making small chirping sounds that might have been questions. Within minutes, Pip had decided that this strange, soft creature was a friend and began following Jack around like a loyal pet. Vera watched the interaction between her child and the human with something that looked remarkably like amusement. Through their mental connection, Jack sensed her approval and something deeper: respect. He had freed them both from certain death, asking nothing in return and risking his own safety to help strangers. In Vera's experience, such behavior was rare even among her own people. But their reunion was interrupted by an alarm that began blaring throughout the ship. Warning lights flashed in patterns that Jack's universal translator could not interpret, but the meaning was clear enough. Someone was coming, and whoever had chained Vera and Pip in the first place was not going to be happy to find them free. The warning alarms grew louder as Jack grabbed his equipment and prepared to leave the alien ship. Through their mental connection, Vera showed him images of what was coming. A sleek military vessel, all sharp angles and weapon ports, designed for one purpose: hunting down escaped prisoners. The ship belonged to something called the Dominion, and its crew specialized in recapturing beings like Vera and Pip. Jack's mind raced as he considered his options. His salvage ship was fast enough to outrun most commercial vessels, but Military Hunter would be a different challenge entirely. The Rust Bucket had been modified over the years with better engines and stronger shields, but it was still fundamentally a civilian craft. Going up against trained soldiers in a purpose-built warship would be suicide. Vera seemed to sense his thoughts. She pressed her great head against his chest and shared more images. The Dominion used her people as living weapons, forcing them to fight in battles across the galaxy. The energy chains were not just restraints but control devices, designed to break the spirit and bend the will of proud creatures who had once ruled vast star systems. Vera had been a queen among her people before the capture, and Pip represented the last hope of their bloodline. The young hatchling chirped anxiously as the alarms continued to blare. Pip had bonded with Jack during the rescue, and now pressed close to his legs, seeking comfort from the strange but kind being who had freed them. Jack reached down to pat the small dragon's head, marveling at how the scales felt warm and almost alive under his gloved hand. Jack led them to the corridors toward his ship, but Vera stopped suddenly when they reached the airlock. She turned her massive head toward the ship's central core and made an urgent sound. More images flashed through Jack's mind, showing him what she wanted him to understand. The alien vessel contained technology that could help them escape, but it would require shutting down the ship's power core completely. The plan was risky. Without power, the ship would become a dead hulk drifting in space. But it would also stop broadcasting the tracking signal that had led the Dominion hunters to this location. If Jack could transfer Vera and Pip to his own ship before the hunters arrived, they might be able to slip away in the confusion. Jack sent Vera and Pip ahead to the Rust Bucket, while he made his way to the alien ship's engine room. The power core was unlike anything he had ever seen, a crystalline structure that pulsed with contained energy. The shutdown procedures were not labeled in any language he recognized, but Vera's telepathic guidance helped him navigate the alien controls. When he finally found the master switch, Jack hesitated for a moment. Shutting down the power would also destroy any chance of studying this incredible technology. The ship represented scientific discoveries that could advance human knowledge by centuries. But one look at Pip's trusting eyes through the airlock window made the decision easy. Some things were more important than scientific advancement. The power core went dark with a sound like a dying breath. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the ship, casting strange shadows on the organic walls. Jack ran for his ship as the artificial gravity began to fail, pushing off walls and door frames to maintain his momentum in the decreasing gravity field. He barely made it to the Rust Bucket before the alien ship went completely dead. Vera and Pip were waiting in his cargo hold, the adult dragon curled protectively around her offspring. Jack sealed the airlock and rushed to the cockpit, firing up his engines even as the sensors detected the approaching Dominion vessel. The hunter's ship dropped out of hyperspace, like a predator spotting wounded prey. It was smaller than the alien vessel, but radiated menace from every line of its design. Weapon ports bristled along its hull, and sensor rays swept the area with mechanical precision. Jack's communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that came through his speakers was cold and professional. Captain Rex of the Dominion Recovery Division was demanding the immediate return of stolen property. The terms he used made Jack's blood boil. Vera and Pip were not property to be owned and traded. They were living beings with thoughts and feelings and the right to freedom. Jack keyed his transmitter and gave the Dominion captain a response that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. It was short, direct, and involved several suggestions about what Rex could do with his recovery orders. Then he cut the channel and pushed his engines to maximum power. The chase began immediately. The Dominion ship was faster in a straight line, but Jack knew the asteroid field better than any military pilot. He dove between tumbling rocks the size of city blocks, using their mass to break sensor locks and hide his ship's heat signature. The rust bucket groaned under the stress of high-speed maneuvering, but she held together like she always had. Rex was not easily fooled, though. His ship fired marker beacons into the asteroid field, creating a sensor net that would track any movement larger than shuttle. Jack found himself being herded toward open space where the military vessel's superior speed would end the chase quickly. That was when Vera decided to join the fight. The adult dragon squeezed the cargo hold door and into the main corridor of Jack's ship. She was too large to fit comfortably in the human-sized spaces, but she managed to reach the cockpit where Jack was wrestling with the controls. Through their mental link, she showed him what she could do to help. Vera's breath weapon was not just destructive force. It was controlled energy that could be directed with precision. If Jack could position his ship correctly, she could disable the Dominion vessel's engines without destroying it completely. The plan was dangerous and required split-second timing, but it was their only chance. Jack brought the rust bucket around in a wide arc, pretending to flee toward the outer edge of the asteroid field. Rex took the bait, accelerating his ship to intercept before his prey could escape. The two vessels raced through space on a collision course that would bring them within weapons range in less than a minute. At the last possible second, Jack rolled his ship and opened the cargo bay doors. Vera's had appeared in the opening, her throat already glowing with contained energy. The Dominion captain had perhaps 2 seconds to realize what he was seeing before 20 feet of angry dragon-breathed concentrated plasma across his ship's engine compartment. The military vessel shuddered as its main drive died. Emergency systems kicked in to prevent a complete power failure, but the ship was effectively dead in space. Jack could hear Rex screaming orders at his crew through the open communication channel, demanding damage reports and threatening dire consequences for anyone who had let this happen. But the victory was short-lived. Rex's ship was not alone. 2 more Dominion vessels dropped out of hyperspace, flanking Jack's position and cutting off any chance of escape. These were not hunters but full military destroyers, built for ship-to-ship combat rather than prisoner recovery. Their weapon systems were already powering up. Jack pushed his engines harder, diving deeper into the asteroid field where the larger ships would have trouble following. But his ship was taking damage from the high-speed maneuvering, and his shields were beginning to fail under the stress. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as system after system reported overloads and failures. That was when Pip surprised everyone by proving that even young dragons could be dangerous when protecting their family. The hatchling had been quiet during most of the chase, staying close to Vera and chirping anxiously as the ship shook under enemy fire. But when a Dominion missile punched through Jack's failing shields and exploded against the hull, Pip's protective instincts finally overcame his youth and caution. The small dragon moved with incredible speed through the ship's ventilation system, his compact size allowing him to access areas that would have been impossible for larger beings. Jack lost track of him until his sensors detected something impossible. A life form was moving through space outside his ship, apparently unaffected by the vacuum and radiation. Pip had somehow gotten outside the rust bucket and was flying under his own power toward the nearest Dominion destroyer. The young dragon scales glowed with the same energy field that protected his mother, creating a personal shield that deflected debris and small weapons fire. He was still small enough that the enemy sensors had trouble tracking him, registering him as nothing more than a piece of asteroid debris. By the time the Dominion crew realized what was happening, Pip was already inside their ship. The hatchling size allowed him to squeeze through damaged hull plates and access hatches that would never admit an adult. Once inside, he began systematically destroying critical systems with precisely targeted bursts of energy breath. The destroyer's engines died first, followed by its weapon systems and sensor arrays. Emergency alarms blared throughout the vessel as crew members tried to locate and stop the small saboteur, who was methodically dismantling their ship from the inside. But Pip was too fast and too clever, disappearing into maintenance shafts and crawlways whenever pursuit got too close. Within minutes, the first destroyer was as helpless as Rex's original hunter. The second military vessel found itself alone against Jack's ship and two very angry dragons who had decided that these particular humans needed to learn some manners. Vera coordinated the final attack with her offspring through telepathic communication that the Dominion forces could not intercept. While Pip continued his sabotage mission on the first destroyer, Vera guided Jack's ship into position for another plasma breath attack. The remaining enemy vessel tried to retreat, but found its escape route blocked by an asteroid that Vera had secretly been heating with precisely controlled energy bursts. When the superheated rock exploded from thermal stress, the debris cloud disabled the last Dominion ship's engines and left it drifting helplessly. Jack's sensor showed all three enemy vessels were now dead in space, their crews alive but completely unable to continue the pursuit. The battle was over, but Jack knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion would send more ships when these three failed to report in. Rex's final transmission had made that very clear, promising that the entire galaxy would hunt them down if necessary. Vera and Pip could never be safe as long as the Dominion existed, and Jack was now marked as an enemy of one of the most powerful military forces in known space. But as he watched Pip return to his ship and rejoin his mother in the cargo hold, Jack found he did not care about the consequences. Some fights were worth having, regardless of the odds. Vera nuzzled her offspring with obvious pride, and both dragons looked at Jack with expressions that needed no translation. They were family now, and families protected each other no matter what. Jack spent 3 days running silent through the Outer Rim, using dead asteroids and derelict ships to hide his heat signature while he figured out what to do next. The rust bucket was damaged from the battle, and his food supplies were running low. Worse, he had no idea how to feed two dragons or what they might need to stay healthy. Vera seemed able to survive on very little, but Pip was growing rapidly and needed more nutrition than Jack could provide. The answer came from an unexpected source. While Jack was trying to repair his damaged communications array, he picked up a coded transmission on a frequency that officially did not exist. The message was short and seemed like random numbers to anyone who might be listening, but something about the pattern made Jack think it was more than just background noise. Vera confirmed his suspicions when she pressed her head against his shoulder and shared images of similar transmissions from her memories. During her captivity, she had sometimes overheard communications between Dominion ships about escaped prisoners who had vanished without a trace. The military commanders had been frustrated by a network of smugglers and sympathizers who helped slaves disappear into the vast emptiness of space. Jack decided to take a risk and respond to the transmission using the same numerical pattern. Within hours, he received coordinates for a meeting point in a nebula that would hide them from Dominion sensors. The message warned him to come alone and to be prepared for anything, but also promised help for refugees fleeing Dominion persecution. The journey to the nebula took 2 days through hyperspace. Jack kept his ship's weapons powered down and his transponder broadcasting the identification codes he had been given. When they finally reached the coordinates, he found himself facing a converted asteroid mining station that had been hidden inside the gas clouds for who knew how long. The station looked like it had been built from scrap parts and salvage equipment, but Jack's experienced I could see that it was more sophisticated than it appeared. The docking bays were large enough for ships much bigger than his, and the defensive systems were cleverly disguised as mining equipment. This was a place where people who valued their privacy could conduct business without interference from authorities. A woman's voice came over his communication system, identifying herself as Beth and requesting permission to board his ship. Jack agreed, and within minutes he found himself facing someone who looked like she had stepped out of a military recruitment poster. Beth was tall and lean with short gray hair and scars that spoke of combat experience. Her uniform was civilian, but she moved with the precision of a career soldier. Beth's expression changed completely when she saw Vera and Pip in the cargo hold. The dragons had been nervous about meeting strangers, but something about the woman's calm demeanor seemed to reassure them. She approached Vera with the respectful caution of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. "I have been fighting the Dominion for 15 years," Beth said quietly, "but I have never seen anything like this. Your friends are not just rare, they are supposed to be extinct. The Dominion has been hunting their people across the galaxy for decades." Beth explained that she was part of a network that had been secretly helping escaped slaves and political refugees find new lives beyond Dominion reach. The organization had no official name, but most people called it the Underground Railroad after an ancient Earth resistance movement. They operated from hidden bases throughout the Outer Rim, using codes and contacts that had taken years to establish. Jack learned that the Underground Railroad was much larger than he had imagined. It included former military officers who had refused to participate in slave raids, civilian captains who smuggled refugees for humanitarian reasons, and even some aliens who had escaped Dominion control and dedicated their lives to helping others do the same. The network moved hundreds of escaped slaves every year, but they had never dealt with anything as significant as Vera and Pip. Beth introduced Jack to Dr. Finn, a tall alien with pale blue skin and 4 arms who served as the station's medical officer. Dr. Finn belonged to a species called the Healers, who had been enslaved by the Dominion for their knowledge of medicine and biology. He had escaped during a prisoner transport accident and joined the Underground Railroad to use his skills helping other refugees. Dr. Finn examined both dragons carefully, using scanners that could analyze their biology without causing discomfort. His findings were both encouraging and troubling. Vera and Pip were healthy despite their ordeal, but they belonged to a species that required specific minerals and energy sources to maintain their abilities. Without proper nutrition, they would gradually weaken until they became vulnerable to recapture or death. The doctor also confirmed what Jack had suspected about Vera's importance. She was not just any member of her species, but royalty from a bloodline that could trace its ancestry back thousands of years. The Drachmae had once been the most powerful race in the galaxy, ruling vast empires through a combination of advanced technology and natural abilities that bordered on magic. Their downfall had come when they trusted the wrong allies and allowed the Dominion to get close enough to strike. Pip represented something even more precious: hope for the future. He was the first Drachmae hatchling born in nearly a century, and his genetic heritage included traits from multiple royal bloodlines. If he survived to adulthood and found a mate, he could potentially father a new generation of his people. But that would only be possible if he could be kept safe from Dominion hunters who would stop at nothing to recapture him. Jack found himself assigned quarters on the station, while Beth and her people debated what to do with their unexpected guests. The Underground Railroad had protocols for hiding individual refugees, but concealing 2 dragons presented challenges they had never faced before. Vera was too large to hide easily, and both dragons radiated energy signatures that Dominion sensors could detect from great distances. The solution came from an unexpected source. A group of human engineers who had been working on stealth technology offered to modify Jack's ship with experimental shielding that could mask the dragon's energy signatures. The work would take weeks and require resources that the Underground Railroad could barely afford, but Beth approved the project without hesitation. While the modifications were being made, Jack learned more about the scope of Dominion oppression. The Empire controlled dozens of star systems and had enslaved entire species to fuel its expansion. Some slaves were used for manual labor in mines and factories, while others were forced to fight as soldiers in wars of conquest. The most valuable prisoners, like Vera, were kept as living weapons and strategic assets. The Dominion's power came from its willingness to use any means necessary to achieve its goals. They employed neural control implants to turn captured enemies into loyal servants, used hostages to ensure cooperation from conquered populations, and maintained vast prison fleets where political prisoners and escaped slaves were held in conditions that violated every civilized standard of treatment. Jack met other refugees during his stay on the station, each with stories that made him understand why people like Beth had dedicated their lives to fighting the Dominion. There was a family of miners whose entire colony had been enslaved to work Dominion resource extraction operations. A former Dominion officer who had deserted after being ordered to execute prisoners. A scientist whose research had been stolen and used to develop better control devices for enslaved populations. But the refugees also showed him the other side of the story. They had found freedom and new purpose with the Underground Railroad, using their skills and knowledge to help others escape similar fates. The network provided not just transportation and hiding places, but new identities, job training, and communities where former slaves could rebuild their lives. Pip thrived in the diverse environment of the station. The young dragon was curious about everything and everyone, making friends with refugees from a dozen different species. His ability to learn languages through telepathic contact made him popular with children who were struggling to adapt to life in exile. Within days, he had become an unofficial mascot for the entire operation. Vera was more cautious, but she gradually opened up to the people who had welcomed them without expecting anything in return. Through her telepathic connection with Jack, she shared memories of her people's golden age and their advanced civilization. The information she provided about Drachmary technology and history was invaluable for understanding how to fight the Dominion more effectively. The peaceful interlude ended when emergency alarms began blaring throughout the station. A Dominion patrol had been detected approaching the nebula, probably following traces of Jack's ion trail from his journey there. The Underground Railroad had procedures for such emergencies, but evacuating an entire base was never easy or quick. Beth coordinated the evacuation with military precision, but there were too many refugees and not enough ships to move everyone at once. Some would have to stay behind and hide in the deepest parts of the station, while the majority escaped to other safe havens. Jack volunteered to remain with the rear guard, but Beth had other plans for him and his dragon friends. The Dominion force was larger than usual, consisting of 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller attack ships. Their commander was broadcasting demands for surrender of all escaped prisoners and a dismantling of the smuggling operation. The message made it clear that this was not a routine patrol, but a deliberate assault on the Underground Railroad itself. Jack realized that their presence at the station had been detected despite all precautions. The Dominion was not just looking for random escaped slaves, but specifically hunting for Vera and Pip. Someone had betrayed their location, and now hundreds of innocent refugees were in danger because of the choices he had made. As the first Dominion ships entered the nebula and began scanning for the hidden base, Jack made a decision that would change everything. He was not going to let other people suffer for his actions. If the Dominion won a fight, he would give them one they would never forget. The final battle began when Jack made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of running or hiding with the other refugees, he walked onto the station's main communication array and opened a channel to the approaching Dominion fleet. His message was simple and direct. If they wanted Vera and Pip, they would have to go through him first. The Dominion commander, Admiral Kane, responded with contempt and threats. He had brought enough firepower to destroy the entire nebula if necessary, and he was not interested in negotiating with a human salvage worker who had gotten lucky once. Kane gave Jack 10 minutes to surrender the dragons or watch the Underground Railroad base be reduced to scrap metal and floating debris. Jack used those 10 minutes to coordinate the most desperate defense in the history of the Outer Rim. Beth and her people had been preparing for this moment for years, but they had always planned to run rather than fight. Their ships were fast and their pilots were skilled, but they were refugees and smugglers, not soldiers. Going up against a full Dominion battle fleet should have been suicide. But Jack had learned something important during his time with Vera and Pip. The Dominion's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They relied on overwhelming force and rigid tactics because they had never faced an enemy willing to fight back with creativity and determination. Every battle they had won had been against opponents who followed the same military doctrines they used. Humans fought differently. Human military history was full of impossible victories, won through stubborn refusal to accept defeat and willingness to try tactics that no sane commander would consider. Jack might not have been a professional soldier, but he had grown up listening to stories of underdog victories and last-ditch stands that had shaped the species' understanding of warfare. The first surprise came when the Underground Railroad ships did not try to run. Instead of scattering in all directions as Kane expected, they formed a defensive formation around the hidden base and prepared to fight. The Admiral was so shocked by this development that he hesitated for several crucial seconds before ordering his fleet to attack. Those seconds gave Vera time to position herself at the heart of the defense. The adult dragon had been analyzing Dominion tactics through her telepathic connection with Jack, and she understood something that Kane did not. The enemy fleet was powerful but predictable, following attack patterns that could be countered if you knew what to expect. Vera's breath weapon was not just destructive force, but precisely controlled energy that could be shaped and directed with surgical precision. She used it to create interference fields that disrupted Dominion targeting systems, making their superior firepower less effective. The enemy ships found themselves firing at phantom targets, while the real Underground Railroad vessels struck from unexpected angles. Pip had grown larger and stronger during their time at the station, fed on the mineral supplements that Dr. Finn had prepared for him. The young dragon was no longer the weak hatchling that Jack had rescued, but a formidable opponent in his own right. His smaller size made him nearly impossible for enemy sensors to track, and his speed allowed him to dart between capital ships like a fighter pilot with supernatural reflexes. The battle turned into a running fight through the nebulous gas clouds and electrical storms. The Underground Railroad ships used their knowledge of the local conditions to set traps and ambushes that the Dominion fleet could not anticipate. Human pilots flew with reckless courage that bordered on insanity, pulling maneuvers that should have been impossible and somehow making them work. Jack found himself commanding the defense from his modified salvage ship, coordinating attacks through his telepathic link with Vera and using his knowledge of the Underground Railroad's capabilities to maximize their effectiveness. He had never been trained for military command, but his years as a salvage operator had taught him to think quickly and adapt to changing circumstances. The turning point came when Admiral Kane made the mistake of underestimating his opponents one too many times. Convinced that he was facing disorganized civilians who would break and run at the first sign of serious resistance, he ordered his flagship forward to finish the battle with a close-range assault on the hidden base. Kane's ship was a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons and protected by shields that could deflect planetary bombardment. It should have been invulnerable to anything the Underground Railroad could throw at it. But the Admiral had forgotten that he was not just fighting humans and refugees. He was also fighting creatures whose people had once ruled the galaxy through power that the Dominion had never fully understood. Vera and Pip attacked the dreadnought together, mother and child working in perfect coordination to accomplish what entire fleets had failed to do. Vera's breath weapon punched through the ship's shields like they were made of paper, while Pip darted inside the holes she created and began systematically destroying critical systems from within. The sight of a Dominion flagship being torn apart by two dragons had an effect on the battle that went far beyond simple tactical advantage. Every refugee and escaped slave in the Underground Railroad fleet had lived in fear of Dominion power for years. Seeing that power broken and humbled gave them something they had almost forgotten: hope. The other Dominion ships began to retreat when their flagship started sending distress calls. Admiral Kane's final transmission was a mixture of rage and disbelief as he watched a supposedly invincible fleet being defeated by salvage workers and escaped slaves. The dreadnought's destruction sent a shockwave through Dominion space that would be felt for generations. But the victory came at a cost. The Underground Railroad had lost ships and people, and their hidden base was no longer secret. The network would have to scatter and rebuild, finding new hiding places and establishing new routes for helping refugees. The war against the Dominion was far from over, and the enemy would return with even larger fleets and deadlier weapons. In the aftermath of the battle, Jack found himself in a position he had never wanted or expected. The refugees and Underground Railroad operatives looked to him as a leader, the human who had stood against impossible odds and somehow won. Beth offered him command of the entire network, but Jack knew he was not cut out for that kind of responsibility. Instead, he proposed something different. The Underground Railroad had been reactive for too long, helping people escape after they had already been enslaved. It was time to go on the offensive, to strike at Dominion slave operations before they could capture more victims. Jack would lead a smaller, more aggressive unit focused on liberation missions rather than just transportation and hiding. Vera supported his decision completely. Through their telepathic connection, she shared her memories of Drakmary tactics and strategy, knowledge that could help them fight the Dominion more effectively. Her people had been warriors as well as rulers, and their techniques were perfectly suited for the kind of guerrilla warfare that Jack had in mind. Pip had his own ideas about the future. The young dragon had bonded not just with Jack, but with the entire community of refugees and resistance fighters. He wanted to help other young beings who were trapped in Dominion slave camps, using his abilities to free them the same way Jack had freed him. His enthusiasm was infectious, inspiring other refugees to volunteer for dangerous rescue missions. Dr. Finn used his medical knowledge to develop new ways of treating the trauma and control devices that the Dominion used on their prisoners. His research would help thousands of freed slaves recover their independence and rebuild their lives. The Underground Railroad's medical facilities became centers of hope for people who thought they would never be free again. The war against the Dominion continued for years after the battle in the Nebula. Jack's liberation unit struck at slave camps and transport convoys throughout the Outer Rim, freeing thousands of prisoners and disrupting the Empire's expansion plans. Each successful mission inspired more people to join the resistance, turning the Underground Railroad from a smuggling network into a full-scale rebellion. Vera became more than just a powerful ally in the fight against oppression. She served as a symbol of what the galaxy could become when different species worked together, as equals rather than rulers and subjects. Her presence at liberation missions convinced other enslaved beings that freedom was possible, no matter how hopeless their situation seemed. Pip grew into a magnificent adult dragon whose courage and compassion made him beloved throughout the resistance. He led rescue missions into the most dangerous Dominion facilities, using his abilities to protect refugees who could not protect themselves. Under his leadership, a new generation of young beings learned that they did not have to accept slavery as their fate. The Underground Railroad evolved into something larger and more powerful than its founders had ever imagined. What had started as a small network of smugglers and sympathizers became a galactic alliance of free peoples united in their determination to end Dominion tyranny. Species that had been enemies for centuries learned to work together against their common oppressor. Jack never stopped being a mechanic at heart. Even as his responsibilities grew and his reputation spread throughout the galaxy, he continued to fix things that were broken and help people who needed it. The only difference was that now he was fixing entire star systems and helping liberate whole civilizations. The final victory against the Dominion came not through military conquest, but through the collapse of an empire that could no longer maintain control over populations that refused to be enslaved. When the last Dominion fortress fell, it was not to superior firepower, but to the simple truth that free beings would always be stronger than those who lived in chains. Jack Torres, who had started as a simple salvage worker looking for scrap metal, ended up as one of the architects of galactic freedom. But he never forgot the moment when he first looked into Vera's eyes and decided that some things were more important than safety or profit. That decision had changed not just his life, but the fate of countless beings across the galaxy. In the end, Jack kept his promise to Vera and Pip. He had not just freed them from their chains, but helped them reclaim their place as leaders of a new and better galaxy. The Drachmae were no longer an extinct race, but the founders of a civilization built on cooperation and mutual respect rather than domination and fear. And somewhere in the Outer Rim, in a workshop filled with a familiar smell of motor oil and recycled air, an old mechanic continued to fix things that were broken and help people who needed it, knowing that the smallest act of kindness could sometimes change the universe.